After the fall of Troy, Odysseus's ships had sailed uncharted seas for many days. The wind constantly shifted, pushing the fleet further and further from home. The men were weary, food was scarce, and each new dawn seemed to bring only more sea and more uncertainty. Then, on a quiet morning, an island appeared on the horizon. Green hills rose above the sea, and flocks of sheep could be seen wandering the slopes. After so many days at sea, this sight seemed almost a miracle. The ships first anchored at a small, uninhabited island nearby. There was fresh water, wild goats, and dry land where the men could finally rest. Fires were lit, game was prepared, and for the first time in a long time, the crew could eat their fill. But while his men rested, Odysseus continued observing another island that rose not far away. It was larger, higher, covered in mountains and pastures. It seemed inhabited. Perhaps by shepherds, perhaps by villages hidden among the hills. Driven by curiosity, Odysseus made a decision the following morning. He would not take the entire fleet. The other 11 ships would remain anchored at the uninhabited island, safe with most of the crew. Only one ship would sail to that unknown land. When they reached the rocky shore of the island, Odysseus chose only 12 men to accompany him. The others remained on the ship, awaiting his return. Thus, only 13 men began to slowly climb the green slopes of the mysterious island. After walking among rocks and pastures, the small group found something impressive. A huge cave opened in the slope of a hill. The entrance was gigantic, too large to belong to any ordinary shepherd. Even so, they decided to investigate. Upon entering the cave, they were surprised by what they found. Stone shelves were full of large wheels of cheese. Clay jars were overflowing with fresh milk. Baskets and containers showed that food was produced there in abundance. Some men were amazed by the discovery. Others were uneasy. They suggested taking what they could and returning immediately to the ship. But Odysseus wanted to meet the owner of that place. Perhaps it was a shepherd willing to offer hospitality, so they decided to wait. The sun began to disappear behind the mountains when a heavy sound echoed from outside the cave. First came the footsteps. Each beat against the ground made the cave vibrate. Then, a gigantic shadow covered the entrance. The creature that appeared there was enormous, much larger than any man. In the center of its face was only a single eye. It was the Cyclops Polyphemus. He was leading a large flock of sheep into the cave. One by one, the creatures passed through the entrance. After that, the giant picked up a colossal stone and rolled it until it completely blocked the exit. That rock was so heavy that no human could move it. When he finally looked inside the cave and saw the men gathered there, the silence became terrifying. Odysseus tried to speak. He said they were travelers lost at sea and asked for hospitality, as was customary among men. But Polyphemus did not respect human laws. Without any warning, the monster's enormous hand advanced and seized 2 sailors. Before anyone could react, he crushed them against the cave floor. The sound of breaking bones echoed through the stones. Then, the Cyclops began to devour them in front of the other men. Terror gripped the place. Some screamed, others recoiled in horror. Odysseus gripped his sword, but realized something terrible. Even if he killed the giant, no one there would be able to move the stone blocking the exit. They would die trapped inside the cave. So he sheathed his sword and waited. The next morning, the horror continued. As soon as he awoke, the Cyclops seized 2 more men and devoured them without hesitation. After that, he walked to the entrance of the cave, pushed aside the gigantic stone, and let the flock out to graze on the island's hills. The giant led the sheep out, but before leaving, he rolled the stone back to seal the cave entrance. All day long, Odysseus and the survivors remained trapped in darkness, awaiting the creature's return at dusk. Fear gripped the place. Every man knew that when the monster returned, more deaths would follow. It was at that moment that Odysseus began to observe every detail of the cave. Leaning against the wall was a huge wooden log used by the Cyclops as a staff. A plan was born. With sharp stones, the men sharpened the end of the log until it became a large stake. Then they placed the wood over the fire to harden it in the flames. The hours passed slowly, until, at dusk, heavy footsteps echoed again from outside. The giant was returning with the flock. The sheep entered the cave again, and the enormous stone once more closed the exit. Without any hurry, Polyphemus seized 2 more men and devoured them before the survivors. Then Odysseus approached the Cyclops, carrying a wineskin of strong wine he had brought from the ship. Curious, the giant accepted the drink. He drank once, then again, and again. The wine was too powerful even for a creature of that size. Soon, the Cyclops' single eye began to feel heavy. Before falling asleep, he asked the name of the man who had brought him the drink. Odysseus calmly replied, "My name is Nobody." Satisfied, the Cyclops laughed and promised that nobody would be the last to be devoured. Soon after, he fell into a deep sleep. It was their only chance. Odysseus summoned his men, pulled the stake from the fire until its tip was glowing red-hot, and together they charged at the sleeping monster. With all their might, they thrust the burning wood directly into Polyphemus' single eye. A monstrous scream shook the entire island. The Cyclops awoke in pure agony, tearing the stake from his face as he roared in pain. Now he was completely blind. The following morning, even though blind, the Cyclops opened the cave to let the sheep out to graze. He positioned himself at the entrance and ran his hand over the back of each animal that emerged, trying to prevent the men from escaping. But during the night, Odysseus had prepared the final part of his plan. He tied each of his companions under the bellies of the large sheep in the flock. Thus, when the animals began to leave the cave, the men remained hidden under their thick wool. One by one, the survivors passed through the entrance undetected. Odysseus was the last to emerge, clinging to the belly of the largest sheep. As soon as they reached the outside of the cave, the men ran across the hills to the ship that awaited them on the shore. The sailors who had remained on the vessel were relieved to see them return alive. The survivors quickly boarded and began to row with all their might. Behind them, at the entrance to the cave, the blind Cyclops screamed in fury. The escape had worked. But that terrible encounter would still have consequences, because the monster they had blinded was not just any giant. He was the son of the powerful sea god. And the seas that Odysseus still needed to cross were about to become much more dangerous. And so ends one of the most dangerous encounters of Odysseus' journey. If you enjoyed this story and want to continue following other adventures from mythology and the great legends of antiquity, don't forget to support the channel. Leave your like to help this video reach more people. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes, and activate notifications to be notified whenever a new story is published. There are still many challenges on Odysseus' long journey across the seas, and each one reveals even more impressive creatures, gods, and mysteries. So stay tuned for the next videos, because the journey is only just beginning.